In this series of videos, we explore the widespread effects of disasters of a national or even global scale on the various regions of Canada. This installment is a continuation of the last one I did, where we initiated our discussion about how the Rocky Mountains and the lower mainlands of Alberta would be impacted post-collapse. In this video, we continue that discussion, so stay tuned. You can show your support for the After the Collapse series by liking, commenting, and sharing this video on other social media platforms. Enjoy the video. So at the end of the first part of this Alberta SHTF special, we began a discussion about the various threats that will be typical of this region, and we will begin where we left off today. Now, another big threat, especially on Alberta Highway 93, which basically stretches from Hinton all the way to Banff, is going to be the threat of avalanches and natural blockades, making the highways impassable. Without machines to maintain the highways, not only in the mountainous regions, but pretty much anywhere in a region which is prone to heavy snowfall, that snow is not going to be removed grid down, so it's going to severely restrict travel. Also, the winding roads of the Rocky Mountains, where every 100 meters you don't know what's coming around the corner, are going to be prime spots and choke points for ambushes by marauders. Another potential hazard within this region is going to be the obscene amount of insects. The further you go north, the worse the bugs get. There are some places around Fort McMurray at the right time of year where there are enough black flies, deer flies, mosquitoes, horseflies, wasps to drive a man to insanity within a very short period of time. And the same holds true for nearly every Canadian province with the exception of Vancouver Island. So if you don't like bugs, you might not want to go to northern Alberta, because unless you have military-grade DEET or the thick skin of the northern Aboriginal people, the bugs will surely drive you insane. DEET was a chemical that was invented by the US military in World War II, and it's the only insect repellent that's truly effective in the Canadian backwoods. The concentration of DEET in the bug spray you use should exceed 30% minimum in these backcountry regions to be effective. The great thing about DEET is that it's pretty much going to last forever, and it's going to be one of the premium SHTF barter items in Canada that nobody thinks about. Another thing to consider within this region is going to be acute mountain sickness. And this is going to be for people who are not adapted to the environment. This is going to be an issue for refugees who are coming from places that are much closer to sea level. This high altitude pulmonary edema is probably only going to occur at the much higher altitudes, which few people are going to traverse above the tree line in the mountain ranges. But this is just another factor for your consideration if you plan on acclimating to this environment post-collapse. Other potential weather anomalies and hazards within this region are flash flooding. Between June and July of 2013, catastrophic flooding that was described as some of the worst in Alberta's history hit the region and displaced over 100,000 people, causing nearly $5 billion in damage and leading to 5 deaths. Unprecedented torrential rainfall was the cause of this flash flooding. Without adequate emergency response systems, you will be on your own to deal with any issues like this that should arise. Now, the threat of wildfires within the mountains and above the tree line in northern Alberta is going to increase exponentially in the case of a grid down situation, for numerous reasons. One of those reasons is going to be the inability of firefighters to respond and actually put out the fires as they arise. The next is going to be the fact that you're likely going to have more people out in the wilderness areas, lighting fires, and not doing so in accordance with existing park fire regulations for survival purposes. And as such, you're going to see a higher incidence of fires. The 2016 cataclysmic wildfires that affected Fort McMurray this year and caused the evacuation of the entire town of 150,000 people. demonstrates the sheer unrelenting force of these forest fires, which have been occurring with greater frequency and greater intensity over the years. We've had the luxury, it's sad to say, of having these events occur while we've had the ability to somewhat respond to the best of our technological capability. But in the instance of grid down, these fires are bound to be far more devastating. So anybody who is planning on bugging out into a heavily forested region in an SHTF situation should have some plan of escape, because if a wildfire does come through your region, you will have to evacuate. Now, if we're talking about a global nuclear exchange, Edmonton and Calgary are likely going to be on the hit list, just because of the fact that they have very substantial populations and they're also critical for energy production. So any military strategy would likely want to see through the eradication of these two metropolitan areas. And Fort McMurray may be on the hit list as well, because neutering a nation's ability to mine the raw materials it needs to defend itself with, particularly some of the largest oil deposits in the world, is going to be a critical part of any World War III strategy. Now that said, if we're not talking about a mutually assured destruction scenario, that region may be spared just so there's some spoils to be had by whatever country did decide to invade. One of the biggest problems even today with respect to residing in the mountains is comms. Because of the high mountain peaks, it's very challenging, even with conventional technology, to communicate with people who are even miles away without hardwired comm systems. In addition, mobility is going to be extremely limited. There are very few roads within this region, and traversing mountainous terrain, especially that which is blanketed with dense forest, is going to prove incredibly challenging. Through uncut, uncharted wilderness, a person would be lucky to traverse even a couple miles a day with all of their gear. Now, some of the obvious benefits of security within the Canadian Rocky Mountains is going to be the concealment factor. You could go and get lost and never ever have to see a human being again. You can walk in hundreds of miles in one direction without seeing anybody, unless your anybody is wild animals, which you will certainly see a lot of. Another option for traversing this region is going to be utilizing the railways. With the right kind of vehicle, you could drive on these railway tracks for large stretches. However, you're going to reach several junctures where this is not going to be possible. Building the Pacific Railway was one of the greatest construction feats in Canadian history, and as such it's certainly a system which is going to have some utility post-collapse. In a widespread SHTF scenario where gasoline supplies are limited and when our modern highways are impassable or not maintained, traveling via horseback will once again become an expedient way to get from place to place. Of Canada's 1 million strong population of horses, nearly 33%, or 330,000 of these, can be found within the province of Alberta. This is not counting the wild horses which freely roam the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. Even with modern all-terrain vehicle technology, there are certain places that horses can traverse that any other vehicle simply cannot. And this is why these four-legged creatures may quickly become one of the most prized companions of any post-collapse survivor. And like the cavalry of days gone by, they may also be utilized as weapons of war. Now, within some of the tourist towns like Banff and Jasper, if you were to take on the dark prepper mindset, you're going to find that there's a lot of uninhabited secondary homes within this region. It's only a very small population of locals who live in the region year-round, and for the rest of the year, there are many uninhabited residences, which will likely be claimed by marauders and refugees. Now, some protective factors for the local population may be the fact that there are few highways into this region and out of this region. It wouldn't take much for locals to barricade the few highways that run through this region, thereby preventing the mass influx of refugees, which of course is going to lead to conflict. This region is very inaccessible because of the challenge of building highways through the complex topography of the Rocky Mountains. Very few corridors are available to travelers. One of the benefits of this region, and pretty much any region in Canada which isn't out east, is the fact that there are no nuclear power facilities, so you would be spared the immediate effects of nuclear meltdown. Now, one of the geographical benefits with respect to Canada's proximity to the United States, in places like Vancouver and around the Great Lakes like Toronto, you may have an influx of refugees from the United States if conditions happen to be worse there. But contrary to popular belief in Canada anyways, I think that it's probably more likely that Canadians will be migrating south as opposed to Americans migrating north, simply to escape the cold weather. That said, if you were worried about American refugees, considering that the American states that border it have very low populations, so that's going to be the northeast part of Washington and Montana, which have very low population densities. As seen on this map here, the many federal, provincial, and municipal prisons tend to be proportioned to the population density of those regions. Keep this in mind because in an SHTF situation, it's quite likely that many of these prisoners will find a way out of these prisons. Especially in the acute phases of disaster, bear in mind that some of the people you may come across may be escaped convicts. In terms of gang presence in Alberta, the majority of gang members are going to be lower level street gang members. There are some motorcycle groups, but their numbers are relatively low, perhaps in the hundreds for the entire province as a whole. But in terms of street gang members, you're looking at thousands, although many of them are unorganized and themselves struggle with addiction problems, which will be a debilitating factor for them post-collapse. As you can see here, there are 4 major military outposts within Alberta. In the case of total societal breakdown, these could be the last bastions of hope for civilization, or they could be points of conflict that you would want to avoid like the plague. Alberta has one of the largest military presence of all Canadian provinces. Suffield is the largest Canadian Forces base, which is located in southeastern Alberta. The size of this base measures 2,700 square kilometers and has been referred to by some conspiracy theorists as Canada's Area 51. And although far less significant in terms of military might when compared to our American neighbors, this military base is a critical component of the technological and research aspect of the Canadian Armed Forces. Thus, if shit were to hit the fan, there would be a lot of activity within this region, especially a scenario that involved global conflict. I want to thank the few people who provided me with some very generous donations over the past couple weeks. It's because of you that the level of production within this video was achievable, and I wish you and your family the best in 2017. If you would care to help me fund these projects, you can click the donate button through my homepage. All of that money gets reinvested into making even higher quality, more engaging videos that allow me to illustrate my ideas with high quality audio-visual media. If you can't make a donation, that is absolutely fine. Please show your support by liking, commenting, and subscribing, or shopping through my Amazon Associates store. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to stay tuned for the next installment of this After the Collapse series, where we cross the 100th meridian, where the Great Plains begin. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.